Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. As you know, we'll be talking about donor cultivation and annual reports today. I'm Heidi. I've been teaching a couple of the Academy classes recently. Some of you may have worked with me on different research projects or doing your conversions, or may have seen me in other ways around Bloomerang. And it's always a pleasure to come and get to talk with you and kind of hear your questions about different topics. So looking forward to this today. And John, if you wouldn't mind, I've got a poll I wanted to ask you guys for this first minute or so here to just kind of share your experience. Have you done an annual report before? Is it your first time? Have you done it before, but this is your first time at this current organization or maybe with Bloomerang? And then about what I'm talking about today, I've got kind of 5 different sections I want to touch on. I'd like to hear from you which of them you're most interested in hearing about, so I kind of can speed through the ones we're less interested in. And the 5 sections I'm planning on talking about are kind of overall strategy as a cultivation touch point, and how annual reports can be used as part of your donor cultivation techniques, part of your toolkit there. I'm going to be spending some time covering some real world examples I dug up that highlight some different ways of structuring your donor listing in your annual report. Probably the bulk of our time I'm going to be talking about data preparation, so like having clean data in your name fields, cleaning out duplicates, probably some quick tips about updating your household names, and then a second section on data exporting, which will be building the report, filters, columns, and just getting that data back out of Bloomerang. And then a little touch at the end about sending out the annual report and tracking that interaction with your donors. So that said, John, what does everybody say in the poll?
Yeah, it looks like for most people, this is their first annual report, but a good deal of them have done it before, and or it's just the first time with this organization. But in general, it's the first time they've done an annual report.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah, and then as far as what they're most interested in hearing about, data preparation was the overwhelming majority, followed up by strategy and then real world examples.
Okay, that's great. The first 3 sections. So I'll just kind of speed through the last 2 sections then. Good to hear. Well, not completely speed through. You'll still get that today. Let's dig in then. I'm so excited you guys are doing it for the first time. That always, I think, has a lot of pressure on like, what is the right thing to do? What's the right way to do this? And hopefully you'll come out of this feeling a little bit reassured in there isn't one right way. There's a lot of things you can do. And I think you just find what's a good fit for both the amount of time you have available and what your goals for this project are. So there's always a balancing act there. If you could spend hundreds of hours on it, but if you don't need to, then what's good can be a little bit easier to achieve. So let's talk about strategy. A lot of what I was planning on talking about today, and still will be, is kind of pulling that donor list. Here's a list of donor names, but annual reports have several goals. A lot of times people will point out that a main goal of it is that it's transparency around your financials. So there'll often be a place in your annual report where you've got information for donors to see that kind of like trust building, openness that you have talking about your money, your revenue, your expenses. You're probably going to be getting that from your finance team, from your accountant, maybe not so much from your donor CRM, in part because they have more complete picture of financials often than the donor CRM does. But it's also really nice to get it from them because then it aligns with whatever you put in your audit, whatever you put in your 990, and what you put in your annual report are all telling the same story. So you're not kind of like recreating the number and maybe it's a little bit different and suddenly people are raising eyebrows at you. Another really important goal of your annual report as a donor communication piece is that it's a place for you to talk about what you do, what your role is, what you've achieved, what you're hoping to achieve, and really building excitement around the impact that your organization does, that donors do through your organization. I can't talk a whole lot about that because it's really unique to you and what your organization does, but I do have some resources. I'll have links to them at the very end from other webinars, from experts who kind of do things with message building and design. So if you're looking kind of for that, there's a lot of really cool ideas out there of how to make sure you're using this as a communication touch point, not just as another financial statement. And then I have this listed third, but it's really what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the day, is the goal of it being a place for you to show appreciation for past support. So you'll often see that donor name list or kind of the leaderboard of who our biggest donors are. And some of the examples I've got ready for you to show today show some different ways of tackling that. I think one of the main themes we're going to be coming back to is which kinds of donors do you want to be talking to most directly, and what do you want their takeaway to be? I mean, there's a little bit of, you gave last year, we appreciate you, that's nice. Or you gave last year and it was very important to us, and that's nice. But there's also always that element of, here's what everybody's doing. So like you are giving to us and that's great, but here's another way you can engage, another way you can give, whether that's like signing up for monthly giving, signing up for a gift in their will for a little bit older donors who are often doing more thoughtful preparation of their wills. Even if it's just leveling up of like, hey, thanks for your like loyal commitment throughout the years. We actually have this like 5-year donor club, and you're so close. Can you just can you kind of taste it and see it coming and get excited about, oh, next year I'm going to be on that 5-year donor club list. So the appreciation for supporters section kind of has two goals. The one of like, this is the thank you for everybody who came who gave last year, and the other one was just kind of that like setting the bar for where you want them to be seeing their commitment going in the coming years with your organization. So as far as how you're going to break out that donor list, there isn't a rule I can tell you that will be exactly the rule that all of you should do. You're going to kind of see a lot of different examples coming up here of different ways that you can slice and dice your donor list. They're kind of inspiration. And in order for you to decide which ones to pick up, you'll want to kind of balance, like I said, how much work is it? How easily can you grab it? Against, is that your goal? Is that something you are trying to achieve? You could break down like, gifts to the annual fund that were greater than $10 from somebody who'd given 3 times before, but is that a kind of segment of your donors one you're trying to highlight, or is it just something tricky to pull that you saw somebody pulling somewhere else and now you feel pressure to do it as well? So you can kind of like pick and choose the examples that best meet the kind of joinage there between your message and things that you have time to pull together. Like all of it's possible. Everything's possible. It's just whether it's kind of like the right effort for value for your organization. And some of the questions you can ask yourself to think about that, to think about those different breakouts you're going to do are, who are you sending this to? If it's kind of a digital copy, you might email it out to everybody. You might put it on your website. But if you have kind of those rare hard copies, if you're getting like 200 hard copies printed to hand out to people, being kind of conscious of who are the people you want to give it to, and what do you want their takeaway to be. If you're going to hand it out to your board, if you're going to be sending it to your major donors or sending it to your monthly donors, being really thoughtful about, I know that they're going to be getting this copy. I want them to be able to open up to page 3, and I want their takeaway on page 3 to be, I want to be a member of that club, or I'm so proud that like I give every year so I get to be a member of that club, or it's really important to me to be a monthly donor, and this just shows why, because I can see the impact I'm making. So kind of who's going to be getting those hard copies? What do you want them to be thinking and saying to themselves, and how do you want them to be describing their own commitment and their own role when they see themselves in this listing? Not just, yep, I gave a donation and I was in the list. So that is a thing. You can do it. It's perfectly fine. This is just kind of like if you are trying to do something a little bit more nuanced, these are some ways that you can make sure you're doing it in a way that's effective for you and not just, well, I drew some lines in the list and I think that's what I was supposed to do, so we're good. Once again, if you just draw some lines in the list, it's okay. This is just how you can kind of justify it to yourself. So let's get into some real world examples. I pulled these, they're from like the past few years, and each of them is going to highlight a couple things. This is a really great place if you have that kind of like zoom in functionality. If you want to read some of these, I've got links to them as well. So when you get the slides after, you can go browse them at your leisure, or even just Google nonprofit annual report examples. That's how I found these. But it's kind of hard to read. I'm going to kind of talk about each of the parts on these following slides that I think is really worth highlighting. So I'm starting here with Vail Valley Foundation's annual report from a couple of years back, in part because it just has so many things to talk about that we're going to be getting to later. I wanted to point out they've got anonymous donors, which is a major area we hear a lot about. So like at the top of each of these categories, they say anonymous, and like this category had 2 people in it, so who were anonymous. So it says like anonymous parentheses 2. You know, you don't need to list out anonymous 15 times. They don't know the difference. They don't know which one in the list they are. You can just kind of condense those down. But it's a really kind of nice way to just slip them in there. I also noticed when I looked at theirs that when they do have household giving, so like here it says Holly and Tim, they are consistently kind of saying name and name last name. They're using the ampersand instead of spelling out the word and. That's always a nice little touch in annual reports. You already have these very dense pages full of text, and by using the ampersand symbol, you just kind of like have a little bit less black text all over your page. And we're going to be looking at how to kind of like check your database for that when we get into the database preparation section. From a kind of a strategy point of view, you'll see they've got these grouped by category. So they have Millennium Club, Visionary Circle, Education, Legacy. Each one has its own description, like what are their rules for how you get into that group? What's the value? You know, this one says like gave 2 educational programs. These are people who loyally give in their legacy, or not loyally, I suppose you do that once. But just kind of highlighting like, what is it about those things that is kind of the like criteria to get into that part of the list if you wanted to see your name there. I don't think I saw it here, but they probably would then repeat the person's name in each section where it's relevant. So if you're like a member of the Visionary Circle and the Millennium Club, you'd probably get listed in both places. Very nice little kind of bonus for somebody who wants to kind of like check off all the boxes. And then within each of these clubs, like you're seeing here, then they kind of did some size breakdowns. And then with each side breakdown, they've got alphabetical breakdowns. So like I wanted to point out here, their sizes are what worked for them based on who was in this list, who's in their database. So they've got like this one down here, 50 to 100K, 100 to 150 to 250, over 250. What those breakdowns are going to be, there's no magic rule. It's what kind of size are you looking for? About how many people do you want in each group? Is that a particular kind of emotional cutoff point for people? You know, we'll do the cutoffs normally at nice, even multiples of 10, multiples of 5. And just kind of like, where is your donor base sitting? What is your kind of assortment of donor sizes right now? And then the last thing I wanted to point out here about the Vail annual report that I think is really unique is they put a little paragraph here at the beginning. It says, we've carefully reviewed the names. If you find an error though, we apologize, contact us so we can correct it. And I think we put so much pressure on ourselves to like kind of guess what the donor's name it is to them, what they want it to be, how they want to be acknowledged. And you don't have the time to go call everybody and make the names be exactly what they do. But this gave them a kind of nice little out of like, we do take that seriously. And if you do spot anything and you want it a little different, here's a path to engage with us, to communicate with us. We can show that we respect your interests in the future rounds. And it's just kind of I think a really lovely way to give themselves a little leeway while giving the donors a kind of opening to talk to them. And I don't think I have it here on my bullet point list, but they also kind of have a nice little element here of denoting deceased. So some of you might have households in your database where like one member of the household has passed away, and you might want to just kind of still list, you know, Heidi and Stephen, but put a little marker next to the one that you know has passed away. That might be the most appreciative way that you could find to talk about what their family has done for you. We'll kind of talk about deceased later if you guys are interested in that. Moving on to my second example, because Vail had a lot to talk about, I found this one from the Boys and Girls Club of Cleveland from a couple of years back. And what I really liked about what they were doing here was the connection, not between just a list of names and a list of dollar amounts, but they brought it back to where you fit into that story then. So they had pages and pages of alphabetically assorted names, but then within those pages, they would kind of break it up visually with quotes, with anecdotes, with images of the people who they help. And Over here, like this one I kind of cut off the page, but if you can imagine, like the top part of the page up here was all just like a story of somebody who was helped by this particular fund, this particular, financial program that they offer. And then at the bottom, they kind of said like, and the money for that fund is coming from here. It's from this group of people, from our legacy givers. So over and over throughout their annual report, they had a list of names. They had the little brackets of like, this is what group they're in, this is what size they're in. And they tied it or even started with, so what? What did that money do? Why would you feel that it was important to you to give that? What benefit did you get from hearing about what good you did? So I think this might have even been a story from one of their legacy donors about how important the program was to them and why they chose to be in the legacy giving program. So these were some of the really great inspiration examples for giving not just a listing, but kind of connecting the dots there of like, and when you see yourself in the listing, you're probably feeling something like this. You're thinking about that, you're proud of that work that you've supported. And the last example I've got here before we kind of move over into my demo database is from the Sierra Club Foundation. What was interesting in theirs is they did not include individual donors' names at all in their annual report, which I think was a decision that they made based on who the annual report was for and how else they were acknowledging their individual donors. What I wanted to highlight about what they did is they once again connected it to a story. They have the dollar amount financially. This is how much we made in grants in 2017. Then they have a narrative like, what are they doing? What is their mission? Where is all that money going? And then they have a nice little listing here where it's not just a list of names and dollar amounts, but a list of like, this person gave us this much and here's what it funded. So little stories here essentially of what good work Sierra Club does, kind of tied back to who's funding it. So you can kind of see that connection of, we're giving the money, this is where the money's going, or if you're not one of these, $9 million grantors, you see it, you say, wow, what a great scope of work, what a great variety of work that's getting done here at this organization. Those are kind of the examples of strategy. I'm about to hop into my demo database and kind of point out some things. I've got a note here from Heidi. You mentioned, how long do you recommend a donor's name continue on the list after they gave a donation, but not additional donations? So annual reports are typically going to be the people who gave money to you in the last year. So if I gave you a gift 5 years ago, you would have listed me in that annual report, not this year's annual report. I hope that answers your question. If not, feel free to chat in again and John will kind of pick it up. I'm gonna hop over into the demo database now because it looks like we don't have any other questions about that section at this time. If you think of one, feel free to share it in. All right, so what I'm going to be doing, looking at in my demo database are those next 3 sections I promised. We're going to look at data preparation, so I'm going to look at our duplicate filters. I'm going to look at recognition names, and I'm going to touch real briefly on mass updating the recognition name field. So as part of that too, we'll be talking about anonymous donors and households. Then we're going to move on to data exporting, where I'm going to show you kind of some strategies for organizing some reports for pulling your name lists, filters for those reports, columns for those reports. It's not going to cover everything that every one of our customers might want to build. If there's anything that you're seeing that's like a good start for you, that's kind of my goal today. And then if you're running into a specific scenario that you're just not sure like how to get it set up, feel free to chime into our support team, email, chat tickets. If you have phone support, you can call and talk it over on the phone, and we'll help you work through your specific question. But I'm hoping that what we're going to cover today is going to be like a really good start for what most of you will want to kind of get things flowing. And then we'll kind of look at tracking the interaction, but I don't have too much time left at the end to talk about that section. So this is my demo database. We're gonna go ahead and look at kind of preparing your data, making sure you've got clean data throughout the year, ready to go for your annual report. The first thing I wanted to highlight here is our duplicate functionality. Part of why I wanted to mention this is because we didn't have that feature last year when we did this class. So it's really nice kind of element of making sure your data is tidy for annual reports. And I think too, what we run into a lot with annual reports is it's so important to actually have the right number. If you're going to be putting lines between your donors, it's important that you know which side of the $100 mark somebody's on. And if you have two versions of their record in the database with slightly differently spelled names, for example, and each of them gave $50, well, then they gave you $100. And if you don't kind of have that cleaned up, you might have a couple little oopsies in there that you can avoid just by kind of like keeping your duplicates under control. Up here, there is under the question mark here, oftentimes an alert, or not the question mark, the bell, telling you about how many duplicates you have. I have mine turned off, so I just wanted to kind of show you as an alternate path. You can always come over here to your constituents navigation, and it's going to be right here under the search buttons. You can always go to that duplicate list page from here. So that's just a nice little tip. The three main things I wanted to show you about the duplicate feature are going to be pretty simple. A lot of it's very self-explanatory to use. Let me see, who did I want? Like, for example, our duplicate feature is going to be based on whether their email address is the same. If so, it's going to think that they're probably the same person. Or if their email address isn't the same, but their name and address match, or their name and phone number match, then that's the other criteria that it might use. So like Elaine here, we've got her in twice, same name, same address. It's just whoever put her in the second time didn't recognize that she was already there and added her twice. Easy enough to just open that up, look at the two versions, say, well, version 400 was created first, I'm gonna keep that one. You can browse kind of the details about them, merge. Super easy. Because of that email match, you might end up with examples like this, where like Diana and I both ended up with the same email address in the system, but we're clearly not the same person. Now you can go remove my email from Diana's record, keep your data really nice and clean. I always like that approach if you've got an extra, couple seconds. But even if you don't want to like go correct that or remove the bad email address, you can always just come in here and say, these two people are not the same, not a duplicate, and they'll vanish from your list forever. But this third example that I really was excited to share with you guys is a pretty common situation. What we've got here, I've got Jay and Christy. They live in the same place. You and I can probably tell they're a couple. They live together. They're in a household. Not the same person. We're not going to merge them, but they should be combined together. If you're going to list them in the annual report, you're going to want a combo of their household giving. So you're going to open them up. You're probably going to notice one of them might be in a household. In my case, Jay's already in a household, and it looks like we just haven't added Christy to the household yet. So this is a nice little way to spot that. All I have to do is open Christy's record. There's a handy little link here in the duplicate list. You can see she actually has a husband relationship to Jay. She's just not in the household. So this is a nice little way for you to kind of catch some people who maybe just are kind of floating around, not connected to their household yet. So I'm going to just click join household. I know she's a member of that love household that I saw Jay was in. Clean, done. And now when I go back to my duplicate list, they're in a household together, so Bloomerang's not going to suggest that you merge them. We're going to assume they're supposed to be two different people, they're in a household together, you're all good. So that's what I wanted to cover with duplicates. If you run into any weird situations, just go ahead and chat in, but it's pretty self-explanatory. It's just nice to kind of stay on top of and make sure that everything's ready, so when you go pull your annual report data, you know you're working with pretty clean data to get yourself started. Now, the next thing I wanted to kind of pull up and look at then and spend a little bit of time with data preparation is the recognition name field. This is where you're going to be that all important, like, what do I call them? And we're going to look at a couple things, how to find it, edit it, how to handle it for households, and how to use that to track your anonymous donors. So if you have any questions about this recognition section, go ahead and ask those. We're coming right up. So first thing I've got a person here I want to kind of use as my example, Pat Parker. And I'm just going to kind of show you here, over here on the profile page, we've got all the different name fields for Pat, like informal, formal, envelope, recognition, all these different salutation names. And you can make those say whatever you want. They're just going to default to something for new people who get created, and then you can come in here and modify them. So I just clicked edit, and now you can kind of change their first name, change their recognition name, whatever it is you need. So let's say Pat came to you and said, hey, I actually want to be anonymous. You just change this to anonymous, and it's easy as that. Then when you're pulling your data for your annual reports, you're going to want to just consistently remember, like, I'm going to use the recognition name for this. Like, I'm putting whatever I'm going to put in the annual report in this field, and when I pull for my annual report, I'm just looking at that field. It doesn't matter what I print on their envelopes. It doesn't matter what I say in the Dear Pat field in my letters. It doesn't matter what their first name as recorded by the system is. I'm just going to grab that recognition name. And that way you kind of have a nice source of truth for yourself of, this is the place where I go to make sure that my data is clean for the annual report. You don't have to modify everything, just focus there. So I just made Pat anonymous. Now we'll kind of look at that again in just a second, but I wanted to point out too, like, Pat's in a family. So the household functionality in Bloomerang is really great. If you make Pat says Pat, Pat's spouse says something else, then you're probably in the annual report going to want to list them together as a combined unit. You're going to want to say Taylor and Pat. So it's the exact same thing here. A household has pretty much no information on its own. It's just kind of a combined record of what's on the different members of the household. But the one thing it has of its own is it has its own name field. So you can come in here and say, oh, I want this to be spelled out because that's my board member's preference, or Pat's actually more engaged with us, so I want to say Pat and Taylor to kind of give Pat a little bit of extra credit. And you can make this household recognition name just like we saw before, be anonymous, say whatever it is you want to be listed in the annual report for them. I know we saw that example of, well, what if one person has passed away recently, but maybe you still do want to mention that they both as a family unit were giving. You can find some method like this of putting like a little asterisk next to somebody's name, whatever kind of rules you want. This is the place where you're going to put them into action. I want to point out too, while I'm here on a household, that I've done a lot of conversions with a lot of people, and there's kind of a mix of approaches to how formal you want to go here in terms of including name titles. Now, I chose Pat and Taylor particularly here because I do not know what their name titles are. I do not know if it's Mr. Pat, if it's Mrs. Pat, if they're both Mr. I don't know if one of them is a doctor and one of them is a pediatrician, which is kind of doctor. But essentially, if you start going down the route of wanting to include titles and name titles on all of your donors, you might end up with some weird situations like this of, they never actually told me what their name title is. They don't necessarily have that data ready to be filled in, and then you kind of have given yourself a situation where you're kind of forcing yourself to go fill it in. For that reason, I'm typically recommend kind of leaving it very simple, keeping it with the names that you do know, and then if you happen to have more formalized names for some of your people, if they do say like, oh, I really want you to always call me Pat Esquire, like that's a really important title to me and I want that to be included, you can always come and add it, but I'd recommend letting your rules of kind of what your consistency is throughout your database be as fleshed out as what your donors are giving you, instead of kind of coming and forcing extra information onto their names. So I'm going to go ahead, take a little breather there, just save my changes. And that's kind of the recognition name field. That's how it's going to work. Like if you're wanting to pull it for the household, if you want to be recognizing them on the household, then it doesn't really matter what I fill in on Pat and Taylor's records individually. It just matters what I fill in here. We kind of looked at anonymous really quickly there. I actually had somebody else in my system I made anonymous the other day for the previous version of this class. And I think one interesting thing to mention too, when you are doing kind of the customization of something like, oh, this person told me they have a preference, you can change it here. You can update it really easily. You may in a couple of years not remember if they had a preference or if you just typed it weirdly. So it's always nice to leave yourself a little note, like if Pat calls you and says, hey, I want to be anonymous, just slap a little note on that timeline saying, hey, got a phone call, they said this, I updated the record. That can be really nice when you come back later, you're a little forgetful and you say, hey, I'm trying to clean up all my data and I just don't know if like they asked for this or if I decided to do it. So giving yourself a little bit of a place that you can go and check. Let me see. Let me talk just a little bit more about anonymous. And I've gotten some questions We actually regularly get questions about handling anonymous gifts because of how it could be tracked possibly on the gift or on the person. I think from an annual report perspective, you're always going to find it easiest to make their recognition name reflect that. Some database systems track anonymous as a field on the gift itself, but then you can end up with this weird hodgepodge of like 2 of their gifts were marked as anonymous, but 1 of them doesn't, and where do you put them in the annual report, and what name do you put in the annual report? And I don't think that we really typically hear that that's actually what the donor meant, is to have a mix match of gifts. Typically, the donors were just reacting to a field that you asked them to fill out, like on your gift form or on your return envelopes. So in general, I think what we've been seeing is the donor overall is typically requesting that in general they be marked as anonymous, and that's where this recognition name field is perfect. But if you do have a situation where the donor's kind of wanting more nuanced, I want these 2 gifts to be thanked anonymously, but I want that one to have my name associated with it, then you can kind of work that out with them and figure out what's the right level of support that you want to give to that preference of theirs. One other quick thing I do want to point out here too is we mentioned over in the Vail Valley example that they were always using the ampersand, and here I went and manually changed this to the word and, or you can manually change it to an ampersand. But if you're kind of doing a big old database cleanup, you've got thousands of people in there, and you've got a whole mix of sometimes it's spelled out, sometimes it's the ampersand, and that could be a lot of work to just kind of like browse through and modify each of them by hand. If you kind of have that preference, I wish I could just, do a find, replace. You can export like a list of your households with their recognition names down into Excel or a spreadsheet. Do the find, replace in the spreadsheet. And as long as you've got the account number for the household, so like this one's account number 415, and the recognition name column in your file, then you can make the changes there and use our import tool to like kind of roll out that change to hundreds of your donors in a little bit more of an efficient manner, especially if you're familiar with our import tool, which can sometimes lead you to breaking a couple things if you kind of get a little slapdash, but can be really efficient to just mass update a bunch of name fields all at once, making sure you don't kind of update the wrong names. Let me see. I've got a great question here from Joanne about households. So Joanne brings up like, what if 2 members of the household donate individually? And do you want to have that total under the household and kind of summing it up as a household? So that's exactly the situation the household feature in Bloomerang is really effective at. So if Pat's giving you $100 and Taylor's giving you $100 throughout the year, and they want to be recognized as a unit, as a family unit, which is the default, then you want to be recognizing them at the $200 level. So the household, this one's a horrible example. I haven't put any gifts on either of their records. But the household is going to say, this is the giving total for the entire family, all the individual people who are in this family. And that is exactly what you probably want for your annual report. There are a couple really rare situations where for tax purposes, a donor might reach out and say, hey, the 2 of us don't want to be treated together. We want to get separate tax letters. In that case, you're probably going to want to leave them separate and figure out what they want done in the annual report. But that's going to be an unusual scenario that only a few of you are going to have a plan for. So in general, yeah, households are perfect for if you're getting a couple gifts from Pat, a couple from Taylor, or like it had the name on, but you're not really sure that it wasn't just Pat signing the check, but Taylor made the decision. This just kind of takes all that like trying to figure out which one it is and just nests it all up into one family unit, which you can then use in your reports. And we'll look at that when we pull the reports too. This is kind of what I wanted to go through for data cleanup, a little bit with the duplicates, a little bit with the recognition name. It's so easy to just edit the name field, so I didn't have, I think, too much to say about how to do it in Bloomerang. A lot of it is just your strategy. What do you want to put there? What do you want your rules to be, or your note system to be, or your process to be? And if you do have any questions about like, that mass update using the import tool, our support team is very happy to help out with that too. I'm going to go ahead and, all right, I've got a little over 20 minutes left. I'm going to get into the report section because that could go on into quite a bit of depth. So let's move into like, you've got all your clean data, it's all in the system, and you're ready to pull it out. So what I'm going to kind of be showing you, the approach I'm going to be showing you is having separate reports for each of those kind of sections in your annual report. So I would recommend having a kind of consistent naming strategy here, so that like if you've got several different versions of your list, like, hey, here's my capital campaign list, here's my corporate donors, here's my in-kind donors, you can have each of those reports with all of the rules of who gets into that section here in Bloomerang. And if you have them all have a consistent name, it's so easy to just search for them, see them all kind of grouped together, and grab the one you want. So that's just kind of my tip on naming strategy. I'm going to go ahead and start a new report, start from scratch. And when I build a report from scratch, your first decision is going to be, what do you want the body of the report to be? Like, do you want one row per person? Do you want one row per gift? These are kind of the two main options for something like the annual report. Now, if you prefer, if you want to make like one row per gift, you can condense it back up into the donors. It's all technically possible. But the way my brain works, I'm thinking like I want a list of people at the end of the day, so I'm just going to start with a list of people and add the extra information I want. So for me, it makes the most sense to make this as a constituent report. It's not wrong to do it as a transaction report. I just find this way easier. So by default, when you start a new constituent report, you're getting a list of every single person in your database. This is just, here they all are. I have a pretty small database here, 344 constituents in it, and you just know that they didn't all give last year. So in my imaginary situation, I'm making my 2019 annual report. I really just want the ones that gave last year that I'm going to list in the annual report. So let me go ahead and save this, give it a name real quickly. 2019 annual report starter list. I'm just calling it the starter list because we'll make some other things with it maybe later today. So the first thing I wanted to kind of do is add some filters. I've got all of my constituents here right now, and I want to zoom in on just the people who gave me a gift in 2019. So the first thing I'm going to grab a filter for then is whether they gave me a gift in 2019. To use that, I'm going to use this Has Transactions filter. Now, if you're new-ish to Bloomerang reports, we have a whole bunch of ways you can access the data. It's very flexible. And anytime you're seeing has something, has transactions, has interactions, that's going to open up a whole nother set of filters for you to do. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. To start off with, if I stop now, this would narrow my report results to just my people who have a gift associated with their record. Now, I'm talking my 2019 annual report. I want to be a little bit more specific. They had to have given the gift in 2019. So I'm going to click this this transactions here. Anytime you're seeing these down arrows, it's clickable. Like you could click here, change what that part of the filter is. I'm going to change here. I'm going to switch it from transactions to specific transactions. And now I've got access to all the transaction filters Bloomerang offers, all here in my constituent report. So I'm going to add a filter here where the transaction date, we have a lot of built-in fields that have the word date in them. You know, some people start using check date or created date. I like using the date because that's kind of the day associated with when the tax deductibleness of the gift happened. You know, they send you a gift on December 31st and you enter it in the database a week later, they still get the gift credit on December 31st. So that's why I'm using the date field instead of created date. And then we have all sorts of kind of built-in things. You could say during last year. I'm just going to go ahead and hard type in though is during 2019. I don't know why I prefer that instead of using the date is during last year filter, but I just kind of do. So you can do whichever one works better for you or that feels like an easier solution to you. They both do the same thing. Now, at this point, if I stop here, I would be getting, like I said, everybody who had a transaction in 2019. Now, again, if you're newish to Bloomerang, we have a very important field at this point, the transaction type, that I think at least merits you thinking about it, even if you don't end up having to use it. So every gift in Bloomerang, the gifts in Bloomerang include a lot of different types of gifts. So this list would be considering whether they gave me a donation or whether they just made a pledge and maybe hadn't paid it off, or maybe they signed up for a recurring gift, but the payments hadn't started coming in yet. or maybe they have a soft credit, but they never actually gave me any cash directly from their own bank account. All of those things count as transactions in the system, and which ones you want to include in your annual report is going to be your decision. You're probably not going to be including donation schedules. You probably stick to like, oh, well, I got the recurring gift, I got $120 from them, so it's the payments you would count. With pledges and pledge payments, I can see it going either way. Some people really like to say, hey, this person pledged to give me $5,000 last year. That's the level I want to acknowledge them in. Some people like to say, hey, they pledged to give me $5,000 and I got 1,000 of it. They're at 1,000 donor level, and they'll probably stay at that level for the next 5 years. I'm just going to stick with payments here, that second scenario. I definitely want donations. That's, straight, simple donations. And some of you may or may not want to include soft credits too. So that really depends on how you're using the soft credit functionality. In my mind, a soft credit is for when I've kind of directed a gift through a pass-through fund. Like I gave it to my family foundation, the family foundation sent the money to Bloomerang. That's how I would recommend using soft credits. So like the donor is still advising that that gift get made. They maybe sent it through a family foundation, sent it through a charitable giving fund, sent it through their workplace giving program. But at the end of the day, it was their decision to give the money. And so they have a soft credit on their record. If you're using it that way, I think using that in your annual report makes a lot of sense. You could say I got $1,000 from Benevity, or you could say I got $500 from Jane Doe because she gave $500 through Benevity. And honestly, Benevity isn't making that decision, so like they don't need to be in your annual report so much as Jane Doe does, who is the one who is making this decision to support you. That said, I do know some organizations use the soft credit feature in other ways. So I've seen some people who use soft credits for solicitors, like give and get programs with their board. If the board member gets one of their friends to give, then they'll give the board member soft credit on that gift. Or I've seen some people using it for like, they like to see a gift appear on everybody's timeline in the household, so they'll give everybody in the household a soft credit on the gift. If you're using soft credits for either of those kinds of scenarios, it might not make as much sense to count that in your annual report. So I can't tell you which one's right. It kind of depends on how you've been entering data into the system, how you've been using soft credits. And some of you aren't using soft credits, aren't using pledges, don't have any recurring donors. It's going to be really easy for you. You don't need to do any of this thinking about what types to include. You just include everything and you're covered, or just include donations and you're covered. I'm going to go ahead and leave out soft credits for right now, but we can come back and look at that later if that's something you guys are interested in. So kind of to recap, where I've gotten right now is I've got a list of all my donors who gave me a gift. The gift was from last year, and it was money hitting my bank account. It was a donation or a payment on a pledge or a payment on a recurring gift schedule, but like it's actually available for our organization to use at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and save that transaction filter. It's going to automatically refresh my results here. So now I went down to only 33 people, and just eyeballing it, I can see a bunch of these up here on top are actually organizations who've donated in the last year. For this section of my annual report, let's say I don't want to list organizations and individuals together. Maybe I'll put organizations separately, or maybe they won't even be in the annual report. But I'm going to go ahead and narrow my results even further to just my individual donors. So I'm going to add a filter here, refine my list even further. So the constituent type, I can't spell that word today. The constituent type is, and this is a Bloomerang built-in field too, individual. And then I'll kick out my organizations. Now I'm down to 18 donors for my annual report. Hopefully your lists are a little bit longer than this, but even if they aren't, if it's this short, just go and work with it. You probably don't have to do a whole lot more finessing from this point on. And then before I kind of dig into modifying the columns, which I think is a really fun and very flexible part that I'm excited to show, I do want to point out we were talking about households earlier. So it turns out here in my demo database, I have a gift on my record and my husband has a gift on his record. And in the annual report, you're going to want to list us both together combined at one level, right? So let me go ahead and show you how you can do that in any report in Bloomerang. we're each showing up separately here right now because each constituent is getting their own row and each of us is a constituent. But if I just take this green constituent toggle here, it's one of like the hidden features of Bloomerang reporting, and I change that word to household. It doesn't kick anybody out of the report, but it will take anybody who's in a household together and collapse them into one row. So now we are in one row. You see a little bit down further here, I've got Elvis and Minerva are in one row together. I think the Loves might be in here. They're going to be in one row together. So that just kind of narrowed my results even further. I happen to have a lot of households here in my demo database. And that's probably what you're going to want to do in something like this. If you're doing a mailing, if you're doing an annual report, you're almost always going to want to collapse your households to one row for a constituent report like this. The exceptions would be things like if you're talking about volunteerism, you know, he and I might have volunteered different amounts and I want to get credit for volunteering more. So then you might leave us separated out. But in general, when it comes to giving, we're giving as a household, or we're happy to be recognized as a household. So let's talk about these columns. Obviously right now I've got a name field. It's not my recognition name field, so we're going to go ahead and fix that. But first, let me get rid of all these address columns. We're not going to need those for our annual report. So to change the columns in your reports, you just click the blue header right here, and I'm just going to delete that column, delete that column. Could have deleted these maybe ahead of the class for you guys, but you just get to see me do it a couple times. All right, I got rid of all the contact information. We're not going to need that. And I'm going to go ahead and add that recognition name we've been working so hard to clean up. So yeah, this is great. So Heidi and Steve, we pretty much have the same recognition name, didn't have any special instructions. You might see things too where as you're browsing it at this point, you might notice like, there's a little typo there. That's definitely not what I want to print in my annual report. You could just, what I did there is I right-clicked on the row in my report, open the link in a new tab. And now when I go over to that tab, I'm on Cyril's record here. I'm going to go to Cyril's profile, edit, fix that typo in his name, go ahead and save my changes, close that. And now if I refresh my report, his name's all fixed. So if you're noticing something in a report that you just kind of want to real quickly clean up, or open a bunch of records all at once from a report, I really love this little open link in a new tab trick from my reports. So just wanted to show you guys that because I like that functionality. You remember we made a couple people anonymous. This is what that would look like. I know that his name is James, but he's asked to be anonymous. In my recognition name column, I'm respecting it there. That's my source of truth for what to say out loud to the public, but internally I can still know what his name is. You might notice like, oh, some people I've got name prefixes, some people I don't. If you're kind of noticing that and you want to go tidy it up, you can do that mass update or even just update them one-on-one. So I'm going to go ahead, I've got my recognition name column, and in order to get them into your annual report, right, what we saw a lot of people doing, what you probably want to do is sort them somehow, group them, sort them, and you're probably going to do that by how much they gave you last year. So you can add a column for how much they gave. We have a handy dandy little column here. It's called last year revenue. I'm going to add that one first. And remember what I said about the different transaction types. Revenue is going to be donations, pledge payments, recurring donation payments, money that hit your bank account. So we've got a handy dandy thing for that. If that's all you need for who's going to be in your annual report, which gifts you want to include, that's perfect. We have last year raised as well. So that would be that scenario of I want to include my donations and my recurring gifts, but if they gave a pledge, I want to count the entire amount of the pledge, not just how much I've received so far. If that's what you want in your annual report, you can use our handy dandy little raised thing right here. So now I've got all my donors and I've got how much revenue I got from them last year. Let me go ahead then, sort that smallest to largest, and here's largest to smallest. And then I have a small enough data set, I can kind of eyeball this, decide where I want my cutoffs to be for the annual report. I'm probably looks like going to want a 10,000 up level, maybe a 1,000 up level, and then maybe I break down these smaller gifts into more sections, or maybe I just kind of like let them all be in a big old group together. It kind of depends, what's that escalation path I want my donors to be seeing for themselves. If I want them upgrading from a $50 a year person to $100 a year person, maybe I put a cutoff point there for them to kind of see that as a thing they could be doing instead. So if you've got more than 17 people in your database, you can also export this to Excel, eyeball it there, kind of figure out where your lines are in a system where you don't have to just scroll all day and forget how far you went. So that's for if you want like something real simple, last year revenue. Now, if you wanted soft credits like we were talking about, or I know some of you track things other than just charitable donations in your database. Maybe you're tracking fee for service, maybe you're tracking jacket sales. Basically, if they're paying you for other things and you're tracking them in your database, you might not want to include those kinds of transactions in your annual report either. So if last year revenue isn't what you want, if last year raise isn't what you want, if you've got anything a little bit more sophisticated than that, that's perfectly possible. Just ignore that kind of handy dandy built-in column, and we're going to just set up a special column just for this. So just like we have transaction filters up here for which people to include in the report, we have that same kind of transaction filters for summing up their total. So I'm going to do a kind of more customized column here. So I want the amount of my transactions. I'm going to have to kind of repeat the same thing I set up there, that they were 2019 gifts. Oop, got a little ahead of myself there. I wanted the date filter. Date is, once again, I'm going to hard type this. Don't know why my brain works that way. But now I've got like, I can have the sum of all their 2019 transactions. And if I had set up front, like I want to include people with soft credits, I would just kind of repeat those same rules here. I want to include donations, pledge payments, recurring gift payments, and soft credits. That's the amount I want to be thanking my donors for in the annual report. You can really customize that, really get finesse with whatever level of detail you need for your system. Really simple system can use the really simple built-in fields. Anything a little bit fancier, it's all right here for you. So I'm just going to click OK. So now what I've got here is this column's going to say, here's the dollar amount of all the 2019 gifts that were those 4 kinds of gifts. So I'm just going to go ahead and click OK there, and I'm going to rename that column. So I clicked on it, changed the name here, 2019 for annual report. You call it whatever makes sense to you. And I don't know if anybody here on the top had soft credit, so I don't know that that's, well, I actually still have my rules set here to exclude soft credits. Let me go ahead and see if that does change anything for us today. But if they did have soft credits, that would now be, yeah, here we go. So Tom Jones and Pat Patterson had no revenue transactions. They never gave me any direct checks or direct cash donations, but they did send me $1,000 through their charitable foundation. They will show up in this version of my list. So that's a really good example of like, this is where you would want that extra level of nuance if you are using soft credits for charitable foundations. I'm going to go ahead and save that report. So like I said, this was a starter report. I wanted to kind of show you the basic structure of how you can use these filters for who to include and these filters for what dollar amount you want next to their name or you want their name to be under. If you'll remember, if I go here to my reports list, I had several different variations. So like I think once you get started and you know where kind of your lines are, you can build a starter report like this with kind of the columns and basic rules you want, and then you can come here, make a copy of that report and refine it for just your in-kind donors. Make a copy of that report for your grant donors. And then you kind of have here your different lists that you're going to run those, sort them alphabetically, and print them. If there's any questions about that, go ahead and share those. And I'm going to real quick then, I think I'm going to skip over the kind of tracking it. Obviously, this is all about like creating that annual report. And as we mentioned, you might be sending some copies out to people. You might be emailing it to them. If so, you can use the Bloomerang email tool. You might be handing it out or mailing it out to a couple of people. If you do that, I highly recommend tracking that as an interaction on that person's timeline in Bloomerang. You know, this is one of the touch points I had with them this year. I shared the annual report, and under interaction purposes, you can count that as an impact cultivation touch point because it's just kind of like building that relationship, showing them the valuableness of their gift throughout the year. That covers some of the things I wanted to talk about with reports. A lot of them, I know there's so many variations that I wasn't able to get to. If there's anything you wanted to do or I didn't quite get to in this class, We are always happy to help. We've got the live chat. A lot of the questions we get are, hey, I'm trying to achieve this in my report and I'm stuck. Can you help me get unstuck? So there's no shame in asking for help. That's what we're here for. And we're very happy to work out a tricky little report with you. It's so much fun. So to wrap up what we covered today, annual reports are a touch point. You want to start strategically with like, where does this fit in your cultivation strategy? So that kind of drives what you want it to say and what groups you want and which donations you want to include and which donors you want to include. When we got into Bloomerang, we kind of talked about how important clean data is. I love using the recognition name field as your single source of truth, and we looked at a couple ways that you can fill that out, and we looked at ways to tidy up your duplicates and check for household giving. And then I hope it wasn't too stressful or confusing or fast, but I think we showed that like reports are incredibly flexible. They can do a lot of things. And if you have a plan of this is what I'm trying to achieve, I'm sure there's a way to get that number for your annual report, to get that list for your annual report. And sometimes, especially if you're new to the system, it's just kind of figuring out what's the word that I need to click to go find that thing that I'm trying to do. And then I just barely touched on this, but tracking the interaction. If you're sending out via email in Bloomerang, that email interaction gets tracked automatically. But if you're sending out, like handing them out in person or mailing them around, then just go ahead and record that kind of end of your workflow back here in the system. All right. I don't know that you necessarily need a whole lot of additional support to achieve this. You know, we've got great free support. I hope that this webinar covered what you were looking for. But if you do want a little bit more, I wanted to let you know some of the options we've got. You can get phone support so that you can call and just talk with somebody instead of me lecturing you for an hour. You can ask your questions and get your answers in person. We offer personal training sessions, which is a 1-hour consultation with a database consultant who's kind of like reviewed your questions and prepared. And so it'd be a little bit like this, but just for you, so you can kind of talk more. And then for those of you with a standard license, we've also have free disease suppression and NCOA cleanups that you can turn on in your databases. And if you don't have a standard license, if you're on like our Grow or our Light plans, one of our discount plans, you can kind of check the box here and we can follow up with you on information about what it would look like to upgrade if you're interested in kind of getting that free built-in data cleanup. Once again, these are just all very optional. I think you can do a whole lot in Bloomerang without personal training, but if you want it, there's no problem with that. We're happy to do it. Or if there's any other services, questions, topics that you're interested in, feel free to share them here for us. If you liked certain sections of what we saw here and want more of that, I've got some resources here. You'll be getting the slides after the class. Like we have a recorded webinar on documenting a custom development plan. I kind of got into a little bit of the really neat filters you can do in reports with like cumulative giving. You could even do something with consecutive years giving. And I kind of hinted at that you can use the import tool to mass update people. I think those are all 3 really powerful ways that you can use Bloomerang. And if you want more of a deep dive, I've got links. All those help articles are in our help section. You can find them, you know, right now yourself as well. And then I've got some links here to some really great webinars I enjoyed from industry experts on how to think about and how to design and what to say in your annual report. So I think that those are all really fun too. And that's everything. I only went a minute over, John. How are we doing?
Awesome. Thanks, Heidi. That was excellent. Yeah, I'm just going to hop on here at the end and just remind everybody that you're going to get a copy of the slides and the recording of the video. So if there's anything you want to go over again or you just didn't quite catch, you're going to get a link to the video in an email. And if you are currently pursuing credit for a CFRE, this class is worth a 1-point credit towards that. So if you're doing that, that's included with this as well. Otherwise, thanks everybody for showing up, and we really appreciate having these sessions with you. Check us out later at upcoming Academy classes, and we'll see you then.